what I've seen from a deal sense. I mean, we've talked before about 21 was just an absolute banner year. Everything was going haywire. I think comparing 2022 and 23 really kind of gives you a sense of some things where 23 was down from 22. 22 was way down from 21. And I think 24 will rebound from even 23, probably back up to like it was in 22 maybe. But the type of deals, at least that we're working on, and I don't study it probably like you do, right? Because my role is to work on the transactions, but I can just tell you we work with a lot of the strategics and the PE companies that are buying, and what we've seen, at least trending at the end of 23 and so far in 24, the beginning of 24, is a lot of smaller deals, a lot of roll-up strategies.
Sure.
Right, where you've got a talented executive that has rolled off of a deal team for a big strategic that's now got a roll-up strategy, and then a lot more of a targeted. In the old days, well, let me back up and say, I think that there are fewer big assets that are available than we have seen in the past. And I think that buyers have been burned in some instances, right, from casting too wide of a net across too many lines of services, too many jurisdictions, right, where they bought up, and weren't able to operate, right?
Sure.
And so what it seems to me, just anecdotally from the things that we're working on, are smaller deals, more diligence, more time, weighing things. We talked before about how multiples have changed from what they were, so there's kind of an adjustment there. Hopefully interest rates go down as predicted, although the current signs are they're not going to go down as quickly as some have hoped, and some have said the market is already adjusted for, but that's going to make money a little more available. So I think we'll see, a fair number of transactions in 24, but I think that it's going to be, if you looked at the composition of deals, there'll be, a higher ratio of smaller targeted transactions and a little higher volume in that area.
Yeah, I'd agree with that sentiment. I mean, we definitely didn't see the volume that we saw in previous years last year. I think, even though it was down, upstream, downstream providers completed a good amount of deals. I mean, and thinking about the continuum of care, we had kind of the Amedisys acquisition that was announced by United Health. It's probably one of the larger ones last year at $3 billion. They've signaled more acquisitions are going to be done across the care spectrum, but like you mentioned, there's not as many large assets. But I do think folks that are in that kind of payer space or the network space, the primary care space, I think they're going to come into outpatient healthcare services, and particularly within home-based care. So I think that transaction's indicative of that trend. I know you used to do some work with Gentiva in the past. There was that divestment of that ProMedica did. They're a big hospital health system, mostly acute care, but they divested their kind of skilled medical home-based care businesses within kind of hospice and home health. That one's interesting because you see some of these larger groups doing the opposite of what the biggest groups are doing in terms of protecting the core, or kind of going back to the core to kind of bridge liquidity and refocus strategy. You just mentioned that some groups had overbought and they'd overextended themselves. I think that's something too now, whereas you also mentioned earlier in the call, regulations are changing a good amount. So maybe it does make sense to pick your spot in either maybe medical versus non-medical. Although I do think, given the way things are going from a payer standpoint, reimbursement standpoint, value-based care, there are going to be benefits to folks that are integrated. But for the business owners that we deal with that aren't backed by institutional capital or aren't public, I think that's a little harder to do. So the comment of kind of these smaller roll-ups, tuck-ins makes more sense. Another thing that we saw last year that was interesting was not as many PE exits as we would have thought. I guess with the rate environment being what it was, it's not that big of a surprise. But folks like 10X finally divested Team Select. Webster with Angels of Care, they were both pediatric home health companies. But we're hopeful that this year we see some more of that, because if the private equity firms start to exit, I think that'll be beneficial for everyone. Although, again, if we don't see big changes in rates, depending on where certain sponsors bought in at, that'll have a negative effect on valuations, because they might be forced to settle for a lower multiple, and then that'll bring transactions down.